Hi, and welcome back to Understanding the American Revolution. We're still in the aftermath of the Stamp Act. Again, can't overstate the importance of the Stamp Act in bringing on the revolution. This video is going to be about a specific document that we have in the historical record. And what this is about the Stamp Act and about the response to the Stamp Act. But there's a wonderful document that is a transcript of the testimony of Benjamin Franklin, yes, that Benjamin Franklin, to the House of Commons in 1766. We actually have a transcript, the questions and the answers, in which he lays out the opposition, the case for opposition against the Stamp Act. And I think this is one of the most important documents in the entire course. When I teach this in person or online, I very heavily emphasize this document. So I've decided I'm not going to do screenshots of this document because the entire video would be screenshots, and I'm not going to do that. But it is a dialogue, so I'm going to kind of read it, or read key parts of it in sort of a dialogue fashion. Parliament's questions, Franklin's answers. I do a terrible British accent, so you're just going to have to suffer through that. I'm sorry. But let me give you some background as to how this came about. Now, this is 1766, and Franklin, he's, of course, associated with Philadelphia. We know, the Franklin Institute, and there's his house as a museum there, so we know Franklin is, from Philadelphia. So, but here he turns up in London in 1766. Now, what was he doing there? Okay, well, here's the story. Franklin went he lived in Philadelphia, but he spent a large number of years in London. Many years of his life, in fact. In 1757, the Pennsylvania Assembly, the Colonial Assembly, sent Ben Franklin to London as sort of a delegate at large to argue Pennsylvania's interests in front of Parliament and the government of Britain. So they did this in part. One of the issues that they wanted Franklin to press was the complaint of many Pennsylvania citizens about the continued dominance of the Penn family. Of course, William Penn founded Pennsylvania in 1682, and the family was still very, pretty much owned the colony, or at least had a stranglehold on its politics and economics. And Franklin was sent to London to see if Parliament could help with that situation. Well, of course, that got swept aside when the revolutionary sentiment really began to perk up. There was a power struggle in Pennsylvania. Franklin returned, I don't know exactly which year, sometime early 1760s. He returns, and then he was elected Speaker of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, the Pennsylvania Colonial Legislature, basically. But he only served in that role for a few months because this power struggle went on, and then he was defeated in October of 1764. And then he was sent back to London to continue his job as sort of delegate at large. So then, as the Stamp Act was coming up through the parliamentary machinery, Franklin made a mistake. And what he did was he recommended to somebody in the British government, he recommended a friend of his, John Hughes, not the film director, obviously, as he should be put into the office of the Stamp Act agent for the colony of Pennsylvania. This was a big mistake because the people of Philadelphia heard about this, they read about it in their papers, and they thought that this meant that Franklin supported the Stamp Act. In fact, he didn't, but he thought, well, if this is going to be passed, I might as well, get one of my friends hired. So, but the people of Pennsylvania thought that he supported the Stamp Act, and so suddenly they were super angry at him. In fact, a pitchfork mob, we talked about pitchfork mobs like out of a Frankenstein movie, a pitchfork mob marched on Franklin's house in Philadelphia. He was not there, but they threatened to destroy it. Word got back to him in London that people were really upset at him, and suddenly he made a big show of being very much against the Stamp Act. So that's where we pick up here. So he testifies in front of Parliament about American response, colonial response to the Stamp Act. Okay, so we're going to do this in a dialogue. So they ask, the Parliament asks Franklin, are not the colonies, from their circumstances, very able to pay the stamp duty? Franklin, in my opinion, there is not enough gold and silver in the colonies to pay the stamp duty for 1 year. Don't you know that the money arising from stamps was all to be laid out in America? I know it is appropriated by the act to the American service, but it will be spent in the conquered colonies, where the soldiers are, not in the colonies that pay it. Do you think it right that America should be protected by this country and pay no part of the expense? That is not the case. The colonies raised, clothed, and paid, during the last war, near 25,000 men and spent many millions. Do you not think that the people of America would submit to pay the stamp duty if it were moderated? No, never, unless compelled by force of arms. Okay, so we go on here a little bit more. Did you ever hear of the authority of Parliament to make laws for America questioned until recently? Franklin. The authority of Parliament was allowed to be valid in all laws except such as should lay internal taxes. It was never disputed in laying duties to regulate commerce. Have they not still the same respect for Parliament? No, it is greatly lessened. To what causes is that owing? To a concurrence of causes. The restraints lately laid on their trade, by which the bringing of foreign gold and silver into the colonies was prevented, the prohibition of making paper money amongst themselves, and then demanding a new and heavy tax by stamps, taking away at the same time trials by juries, and refusing to receive and hear their humble petitions. Okay, I'm going to break out of the dialogue here to explain something that just went by. Part of the Stamp Act and part of the previous acts that the British had passed vested the right of juries, or vested the right of the Crown to try people from the colonies back in England with English juries. And the reason they did that, they wanted to try them in cases involving smuggling. And they wanted to do that because they knew that local juries, colonial juries, were too partial to their own people, and everybody profited from smuggling, and so they would acquit them, just as a matter of course. And they were trying to prevent that result. So what happened here was that when Britain tried to clamp down and get more revenue, they were closing loopholes, and that was one of the loopholes they closed, and that struck very heavily at the heart of how the colonials thought their legal system worked, which was local juries, jury of your peers. That appears in the Constitution, for example. Okay, back to the dialogue. Was it an opinion in America before 1763 that the Parliament had no right to lay taxes and duties there? I never heard any objection to the right of laying duties to regulate commerce, but a right to lay internal taxes was never supposed to be in Parliament, as we are not represented there. Ding! Taxation without representation. You heard it here first. You say the colonies have always submitted to external taxes and object to the right of Parliament only in laying internal taxes. Now can you show that there is any kind of difference between the two taxes to the colony on which they may be laid? I think the difference is very great. An external tax is a duty laid on commodities imported. When it is offered to that the duty is added to the first cost and other charges on the commodity, and when it is offered to sale makes a part of the price. But an internal tax is forced from the people without their consent, if not laid by their own representatives. Can anything less than a military force carry the Stamp Act into execution? I do not see how a military force can be applied to that purpose. Why may it not? Suppose a military force went to America. They will find nobody in arms. What are they then to do? They cannot force a man to take stamps who chooses to do without them. Boycott. They will not find a rebellion. They may indeed make one. If the Stamp Act should be repealed, would not Americans think they would oblige the Parliament to repeal every external tax law now in force? It is hard to answer questions of what people at such a distance will think. Franklin goes on to say, they, meaning Americans, colonials, they do not consider it as at all necessary for you to raise money on them by your taxes, because they are and always have been ready to raise money by taxes among themselves, and to grant large sums equal to their abilities upon requisition from the Crown. The colonies raised, paid, and clothed near 25,000 men during the last war. a number equal to those sent from Britain, and far beyond their proportion, they went deeply into debt for doing this. Okay, the dialogue concludes here. Is there a power on earth that can force them, meaning to pay the taxes? No power, how great soever, can force men to change their opinions. What used to be the pride of the Americans? To indulge in the fashions and manufactures of Great Britain. What is now their pride? To wear their old clothes over again, till they can make new ones. So he's talking about a boycott. So he's warning Parliament that, hey, we're gonna respond by boycotting everything that you guys make and send to us, because we don't want to pay this tax. We don't want to pay any of these taxes, and we will go become self-sufficient in order to avoid them. So that's what's going on in Franklin's address to Parliament, his testimony to Parliament in 1766. So think about it. Can the American Revolution be characterized as a failure of communication between the colonies and Britain? Food for thought. Anyway, that's quite enough for now. Thanks very much, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks.